Namaste, everyone. This is Dr. Stephan Parker, also known as Stoma, psychologist and psychotherapist by profession and yoga practitioner. And in my role as an advisor to the Center for Yoga Therapy, Education and Research, I wanted to offer everyone some thoughts about coping with fear in the time of coronavirus. It seems at this time in the world that fear is around us everywhere we look. Obviously, the fear of disease and death, of financial calamity, of political divisions, climate change, international conflict, hunger, all of these fears we have. The list goes on and on and on. And we're in a time when in most parts of the world, we are staying at home to limit the spread of this virus, but it also helps us feel cornered and trapped. And so how do we learn to deal with that sense of feeling confined in that way? And I think it helps to really take a good look at fear and to try to discern really what fear is. We experience it mostly at our first look as something negative, as something painful. We experience it as anxiety. Sometimes just the garden variety anxieties of going around the activities of our daily life. But it also becomes an anxiety on a grand scale in the form of the klesha, the afflicted vritti and sanskara that Patanjali describes in Sutra 9 of the Sadhana Pada of the Yoga Sutras. Swara swahi vidusho samarudho binivesha. In the translation of my mentor Swami Veda, fear of death as an obsession is strong and well known even in a learned person, the same way as in an ordinary person, flowing of its own accord. Patanjali is saying here, it doesn't matter how much education you have, fear is still fear. And it is such a vital and fundamental part of our dwelling in the world that it actually is the basis for all of our other fears. Abhinivesha is the fear of the loss of our dwelling. We dwell in our bodies, of course, and so obviously Abhinivesha talks about our fears about physical death. But we also dwell in our habits. In fact, the word habit in English is another word for a place where you live. We dwell in our vasanas. The word literally means a dwelling. And it is these vasanas, these strong collections of similar sanskaras that create the structure of our habits that also form the subtle pattern around which our physical body is made. And this, the loss of that dwelling, is our fear of psychological death. The fear that we have in processes of change, for example. You reach a level of depth in meditation that you've never experienced before, suddenly you feel some fear. And that fear is actually a good sign, because it tells you that you're going into new territory. But at that moment, you need a little bit of help to contain that fear so that you can have this new and larger experience of being free from the confinement of your ego. Fear is also the emotional expression of the primary fountain of self-preservation. My Gurudev Swami Rama of the Himalayas used to talk about 4 primary fountains of desire: food, sleep, sex, and self-preservation. And these desires form the motivation around which much of our emotional life is organized. And we'll talk about that some more in just a moment. So these are some of the painful aspects of fear that we experience. There are also positive aspects of our fear. It's an alarm system. It helps you to know when you're in danger. In my 20s, I thought I would conquer my fear by learning mountaineering. So I had the idea that somehow I would never feel afraid. And what I learned from that experience is that fearless mountaineers get killed. I was walking up a very steep summit ridge some years ago in the Andes in South America. And the slope dropped off about 1,500 meters over the edge on the other side. And I found myself at that moment being very grateful for my fear, because my fear helped me to put my foot in the right place step by step as I went up that ridge. So it's an alarm system that helps you to protect your life. It provides us with a whole repertoire of pre-rehearsed behavioral sequences that help us in those life-threatening situations. You step off the curb to cross the street, suddenly you see a car rushing at you, you jump out of the way. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to actually make a decision to jump out of the way, you just do it. Because that habit is there for you. So there is a good reason for us to have the habits that we have. And this is actually the reason why our nervous system is biased in the direction of detecting threats and emergencies. It responds to emergencies much faster and more readily than it responds to situations that we experience as positive, because it wants to constantly help us to preserve our life. It prepares us to act, to fight, to run, or to freeze. And so, coping with fear is a question of balance in your life. How do you balance the painful effects of fear with these positive aspects? And I think that comes in many ways from learning to deal with emotion at every level of emotion. And in my own thinking about emotions, I decided that emotions have basically 4 components. First of all, sensation. It's something you feel. You feel afraid, but then you also feel tired. And so there are some things we feel that we really wouldn't call emotions. Sensation is part of the picture, but not all of the picture. And it's important to know, to be mindful of what we are feeling at any given moment, and to be able to name it. Because in being able to name it, we also give ourselves the possibility of something that we can do about it. So just that aspect of knowing that you're feeling something and being able to know what that feeling is really helpful. Second component of emotion is cognition, thinking. There's almost always a thought process involved in an emotion for us, and it's those thought processes that help to channel the energy of the emotions. And so they help to direct it in a certain way, and also help to sustain it. For example, in people who are afraid much of the time, very often they find themselves thinking, what if, and what if, and what if, and what if? What if this goes wrong? And then what if that goes wrong? And then what if that goes wrong? And each time, with each iteration of the process, the fear gets bigger and bigger, and pretty soon we have a panic attack. You can actually give yourself a panic attack mechanically, if you want to, by doing that thought process. Or sometimes people will define the situations they're in as disasters, as being terrible, horrible, awful. And this kind of thinking, defining a situation as being a disaster, is disempowering. If you're actually in a disaster, the only choice you really have is to be a victim. It takes away all your power to do anything. And so just shifting how you think about the situation a little bit can make a huge difference. Instead of terrible, horrible, awful, the situation may be difficult, it may be painful, it may be challenging. But those are all things that you can do and that you can deal with. And if you redefine them in that way, then it helps you to feel you have a little bit more power in the situation. And one of the things we know from recent research in cognitive therapy is that even just observing the thought processes involved in emotion helps them to change in a positive direction. All you have to do is be mindful and watch. The third component of emotion is motivation. Knowing how your emotions relate to those primary fountains I was talking about before: food, sleep, sex, and self-preservation. These primary desires are things that we need in order to maintain the life of our body. They're not bad. They're not something that we can really even do without. You can do without sleep for 72 hours before you begin to become psychotic. You can do without food for about 2 weeks, food and water, before you begin to die. So these are all things we need in a balanced way in our life. But if we get too much of them, we get sick or we get addicted. So these desires are related to our emotions in terms of how they motivate us. For example, if you fulfill one of these desires, you feel pleasure. Pleasure is the fulfillment of a desire, sukhanashai raga. If we fail to get a desire fulfilled, then we tend to feel some frustration or perhaps anger or even rage. If somebody else gets the thing that we desire, we feel envy or jealousy. If we get our desire fulfilled and then we lose the object of our desire, we feel grief. So all of our painful emotions are related in some way to these fountains of desire, and understanding how those relationships work helps a great deal in being able to manage how those emotions play out in your life. The fourth component of emotion is sanskaras, the ways in which the subtle impressions of our thoughts and feelings arise in our mind at each moment and provide our mind with momentum, emotional momentum, to act in a certain way at each moment. These subtle impressions, the sanskaras, as I said before, join together at the end of your life and create what Patanjali calls the karmashaya, the reservoir of karma, a kind of subtle pattern that guides the shaping of your next life in terms of its duration, the species, and the balance of pain and pleasure. It determines the kind of body that you will have in the next life. And so working with your sanskaras helps you to modify the expression of those sanskaras in this life, and also helps you to make choices that provide you with a next life that is more conducive to spiritual realization. So all of these components of emotion are things that we need to work with in coping with the fears that we experience. So let's talk about what you can do. First thing, very simple, is to just face your fears. If you face a fear, it reduces, it becomes smaller. If you start to avoid your fears, you try to hide from them or run from them, they grow, they become stronger, and they generalize to more things. This is how it happens that people sometimes end up unable to leave their house, or sometimes even unable to leave their bed. So facing your fears over time with your mindful awareness helps you to gradually reduce your fears to the point where you can actually become fearless, and not in a mindless way, like a mountaineer without an appropriate degree of fear. But it can help you to become fearless in a good way. I met a woman one time who was facing the end of her life, and I asked her whether she wanted to learn something about meditation, and because it might help when the time came to leave the body. She had a stage 4 liver cancer and actually only had days to live. And she said, "Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Please come." And the first thing she said when I talked to her was, "Stephen, I am so excited. I can hardly wait to die. What an adventure. It was amazing to hear that positive sense of what death could mean for her. And this came from a whole history of facing difficult situations in her life and being able to gradually reduce her fears so that she could begin to look at the transition of the body in the way that yogis should look at it. It's a change of clothes. You're changing your old coat and getting a new one. So facing your fears is a really important principle across the board. Second thing, remember the positive reasons for your fear and remind yourself that there's a purpose to them. Your fear is an alarm system. What are the things that you really genuinely need to be concerned about and watchful for? So you commit to doing those things and using your fear in a positive way in those activities. Third thing, and really in many ways the most important thing overall, is to remain mindful. Let your buddhi be the manager of your mind. The moment that you start to practice mindfulness by feeling the flow of breath in your nostrils, you activate the medial prefrontal cortex in your brain, the part of your brain and central nervous system that integrates the rest of the system, that reprograms continually how your nervous system is organized. The other thing that happens when you are aware of the feeling of breath in your nostrils is that it turns on the relaxation system in your brain and central nervous system. We spend so much time being activated by stress, especially these days. Part of that is because human beings are such talented learners. We learn to associate psychological threats with physical threats. And so many of us remain stressed out and activated all the time. It takes some conscious intentionality for us to decide to keep the relaxation system turned on by feeling the flow of breath in our nostrils and by trying to keep that awareness with us throughout the day, and if you can, even into the night in your sleep. Third aspect of mindfulness that's important is that when you activate the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain and central nervous system that houses your habits and conditionings goes into the background. And the integrative part of your nervous system begins to rewire and reprogram them. This is really important. There's a whole complex of structures in your brain that contain all of your habits. And when you're not paying specific attention in your life, this is sort of your habitual sense of self. Your sense of self that goes through your life, for example, with that critical voice running in the background that says, you should be smarter, you should be thinner, whatever it is. Everybody has something that voice is telling you to do differently. And when you become aware of your breath, that part of your brain and nervous system goes into the background. And it's no longer in charge of the situation. I think it's verse 45 of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, even a little bit of this discipline of using the discriminative power of buddhi saves you from great fear. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. The next thing, in terms of mindfulness, is to observe your thinking processes, the thinking processes that are involved with your emotion. If you see your mind catastrophizing, saying, oh, this is terrible, horrible, awful, and so on and so forth, as we often do these days, change the thought a little bit. This is really difficult. This is a serious problem. This is really challenging. Those are all things you can do. And they're all things that bring your powers to cope with the situation to the forefront and to give you a sense that you can engage with the situation constructively. Watch out for what ifs. Watch out for what if this and what if that, the things that tend to drive you into a sense of panic. Another important habit to watch for is what the early cognitive therapist Albert Ellis used to call shoulding all over yourself. Like I said before, we all have that voice inside that's saying, well, you should do this, or you should do that, or you should be this, or you should be that. And there are all kinds of different aspects of our life that voice is constantly commenting on. And if you start to hear that continual critical voice in your mind, just say stop. This is not the voice of God. It's not the voice of the guru. This is the voice of the devil, if you want to put it that way. And don't listen to that voice. Tell it to stop and be quiet. Learn to accept what you see. Because what you see is what is. It's your starting point for a process of change. It's like learning a new posture. You get into the posture, hardly any of us can do the full expression of a posture the first time that we try it. We get into the posture, we feel where the tension is, we direct our mindfulness to that place. The muscles relax, we feel some extra capacity open up, and we adjust until we find the right alignment of that posture in our body. Not in Mr. Iyengar's body, not in any other picture in a book, but in your own body. And so accepting what is becomes the starting point for that kind of process of change and adjustment, whether we're talking about yoga postures or behavior. So it gives you a starting point for any process of change, and that's a good thing. Fourth thing, your regular yoga practice, whatever that may be, is going to help you deal with the fears that you experience. Especially if you're practicing mindfully. If there's no mindful awareness in your yoga practice, there's no yoga happening. Yoga is not a set of postures, and it's not a set of breathing exercises. It is an application of mindful awareness to all of these things in the interest of making our mind clear and pleasant, what Patanjali called chitta prasadana, the process of making the mind clear and pleasant and stable so that you can sit in your meditation and be capable of going into samadhi. In your yoga practice, doing the practices on each side of the body so that you alternately stimulate the right and left hemispheres of your brain and nervous system, and in that way begin to achieve a better state of balance. Practicing relaxation practices in Shavasana and Yoga Nidra are things that strengthen the ability of that system to remain operative more of the time. The practice of Nadi Shodhana, pranayama, is so important in helping to create that sense of balance in your life. There was a time in my own academic career where I had a full-time job, a full-time academic program, and a full-time internship. And I didn't have much time for practice, as you might imagine. So I asked my mentor, Swami Veda, if I only have time to do one practice, what should it be? And he just immediately said, Nadi Shodhana. Because it's really one of the most powerful things, most powerful practices in yoga for centering our mind and attention and for calming us down. And finally, in terms of our regular yoga practice, this whole situation has kind of turned the world upside down and cleansed it. So turn yourself upside down and cleanse, All of a sudden, after a month of staying at home, you look outside and there's the blue sky. And there are so many places in so many parts of the world where they're seeing the blue sky for the first time in many years. And it's wonderful to see and to feel that process of cleansing happening. It's a way to remind yourself that these processes of change also contain constructive elements of change. It's not something we need to be afraid of. And finally, I think the most important thing that you can do to keep your immune system in good shape is to make sure you get a good night's sleep. Now, a lot of people in yoga get the idea, mostly from reading the texts, that sleep is a tamasic activity that somehow is a waste of time. And that may be true for a yogi who's capable of maintaining their mind in yoga nidra even during their waking state. For them, lying down and closing their eyes to go to sleep is a waste of time, absolutely. But for the rest of us who haven't gotten to that point yet, we really need to get a good night's sleep each night. Sleep is, I was invited to a conference of the Indian Society for Sleep Research a couple of years ago, so I decided that I should educate myself about sleep before I go. And it was absolutely eye-opening. Sleep is the strongest intervention for absolutely every kind of medical problem. If you measure the effect size of sleep as an intervention against the medications, the surgeries, all the different things that we can do, sleep is a much stronger intervention in terms of effect size across the board. It helps to maintain the functioning of your immune system in many, many different ways. Just as one small example, the first night that you don't get an adequate night's sleep, over 70% of your killer T cells disappear. And they don't return to the same levels for weeks. This is why when you get run down and exhausted, you tend to get colds and other illnesses. So getting a good night's sleep is such an important part of maintaining the health of your body. Another aspect of it is that the hormones that control your appetite and your sense of satisfaction in eating get out of balance with each other. These two hormones are called ghrelin and leptin. And when they get out of balance, people start overeating. How many people have been sheltering at home and find themselves snacking all the time, right? We usually think of this as a problem about food, but actually about 30% of it is a problem with sleep. So getting a regular good night's sleep each night will help to keep that habit in balance. Some things that help you to get a good night's sleep are to have a regular bedtime. As we said before, our life is built on habits, and that is one of the most constructive habits that you can have. When we deal with sleep problems with people clinically these days in sleep medicine, we don't tend to go the route of giving them a lot of medications because most of the sleep medications don't work very well. What's really important is to work with the behavioral side of sleep, with what we call sleep hygiene. So a regular bedtime. You want to sleep in a room that's a bit cool because your body temperature has to drop 1 degree Celsius in order to fall asleep. If you are cold, then use some extra covers. I live in Minnesota in the U.S., which is a cold place in the winter. So I know in the winter that if my feet are cold, I will not fall asleep. So I have to put socks on when I go to bed sometimes in the winter to get my body to fall asleep. But I sleep in a room that is pretty cool so that as I breathe, gradually my body temperature can drop to the level it needs to drop to in order to drop off to sleep. Turn off your screens about an hour and a half before you want to sleep. TV screens, computer screens, and especially these things. They have a kind of blue light at a wavelength that is stimulating to your brain. And so turning off your screens, especially for people who are very sensitive to it, can really help you to relax, to fall asleep. Do relaxing activities in the time before sleep. My partner and I, for example, will often read a book to each other as we're getting ready to go to sleep at night. Having a glass of hot milk is actually pretty good medicine. The milk provides calcium that helps your muscles and nerves relax, and a little dose of kesar and cardamom is also helpful, I think. It also tastes good. And finally, medications for sleep, as I said before, don't work very well. Most of the medications that are given for sleep problems these days sometimes will help you fall asleep, but many of them have even dangerous side effects, and they tend to affect the flow of your brain and nervous system through a certain sequence of conditions that is really necessary to getting good and restful sleep, and the medications tend to disturb that cycle. Most of the time, the sleep physicians will only use a couple of things. They might use melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone. In some countries, like in the United States and Canada, you can buy it over the counter. It's actually a hormone. And so, as a hormone, it needs to happen in a certain physiological cycle in your nervous system in order to help you fall asleep. It does not have what we call a dose response. It's not the case that taking more melatonin helps you feel more drowsy. That doesn't happen. You need to take melatonin about 5 hours before you want to be asleep, and the maximum dose is 1.5 milligrams. Most of the time people take much more than that, which is not effective, and they take it right before they're going to sleep, which also will not work because it doesn't come in the right part of the neurological cycle of preparing for sleep. So up to 1.5 milligrams 5 hours before sleep if you want to try melatonin. Then diphenhydramine is an antihistamine that goes under the trade name Benadryl in the West. It's an antihistamine that has a drowsy side effect that can help people with onset insomnia drop off to sleep. And it has pretty minimal side effects. It's a drug that doesn't tend to produce a lot of sort of drugged feeling in the morning when you wake up, and is, among my physician friends, one that they will sometimes recommend to people at sleep time. But of course, you want to check with your doctor about any medication that you're going to be taking. So these are all things, I think, that help us to cope with the fear and anxiety in our life in the time of coronavirus. I hope that you all are able to utilize this time for its intended purpose. It seems like this is a time when we are forced into a degree of solitude and self-awareness that helps us to think about how we're living our lives. We talk a lot about things returning to normal. I'm not sure that's absolutely a good idea. I think maybe as we come back into the world, we need to do things a little differently. We need to change our habits. We need to be more mindful about how we live our life. I think one of the really positive things that's come out of this situation is just looking around and seeing how quickly the natural world recovers around us when we're not out there creating a lot of pollution in the world. In so many places in the world, suddenly people are seeing blue skies where they've never seen blue skies before. I've seen so many videos online of places where wild animals have come back, even into the middle of major cities. I saw a picture the other day of a coyote walking down the street in Chicago, Illinois, in the middle of downtown Chicago. These are wonderful developments. And I think in some parts of the world where people have had a sense of hopelessness about pollution being a necessary cost of economic development, part of what we learn from this situation is that that's not true, and that the cleansing processes of nature really can help us to live a better life in this world if we just give them half a chance by changing our behavior. So I wish you all a mindful time in dealing with your response to the coronavirus. I wish you all to sweet dreams of what our lives can be, of the positive changes that can come from this, of the better ways that we can live our lives as we move back into the world again, whenever that becomes appropriate. So, thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you all the best in everything. Namaste.